Sprouting from the mind of a virtual world enjoyer and developer, Minecraft would spring forth from the talented Notch. And although its initial successes were hard-fought and slow-moving, they did come, and what followed that was arguably one of the most successful receptions for a game we have seen yet. Launching fully in 2011, a few years after its successful testing phase, Minecraft would teach the world about proc-generated worlds, building, crafting, and the beauty of exploration and molding things to your desire. Minecraft, at 300 million copies sold over the course of 10 plus years, is one of the most successful games ever, artistically and commercially, being able to bridge entire generational gaps and affect both children and adults significantly, leading to further spawning of the survival genre, a genre that focuses on the same building blocks, literally, and the need to survive in a difficult or harsh world. But after a while, Mojang would start showing interest in putting their interests elsewhere, such as other games, or spin-off games in the same Minecraft universe. Alongside this was their massively successful and growing since inception modding community. Many of these community members would create some incredibly memorable servers and features, leading to Minecraft growing even more as a game. Originally started back in 2013, one community movement in particular would rise above almost all else and would help both innovate Minecraft and further the game as a title. Hypixel Incorporated would create the Hypixel Network, created by programmer Simon Hypixel Collins LaFlame and founders Felipe Rezes Touche, Aaron Donahue, and Noxie D, and of course more. Hypixel would have such incredible success it would shatter a few Guinness World Records and grow to a larger size than many AAA games of the time, and grow to be the largest Minecraft server ever. Any successful modder or private server developer wants to make a legit game they can launch and sell. At least that's something I can personally really relate to as a former Halo 2 and Neverwinter Nights modder. And this was no different for the Hypixel team, who saw changings at Mojang, the company responsible for their success as a base, as a sign they should move on to other ventures. Well, sort of, as some of the team would split to work on a new unannounced game, and the rest would continue to work on the Hypixel servers in Minecraft. Hytale was set to be an evolution in the Minecraft formula, serving much like it did as a new platform for people to create, share, and enjoy an online game with custom servers and content. Originally announced far back in 2013 quietly on the forums, it would be officially announced publicly alongside its Riot investment at the end of 2018. 2 years later, and Hytale was acquired by Riot Games outright, where their updates and ideas would only seemingly grow and continue to grow, as if given or fed a fertilizer. After missing its initial promised 2021 launch date, Hytale would seemingly disappear, with very little publicly updated about the status of the game from there on. The Hytale team, as scale and expectations would soar, would grow to a whopping 110 developers. And then, coming as a complete shock to many, myself included, Hytale and subsequent company, Hypixel Studios, would be shut down, announced to the world tragically June 23, 2025. After 7 to 9 years of total development, the project that reportedly had more than $100+ million in funding and was set to be the next genre buster and innovator was dusted. Hypixel Incorporated still continues to fight on with their super successful network of servers, with Skyblock, an MMORPG-like server, leading the way. But Hytale and the promises it gave of introducing streamlined custom content online and providing a world full of adventure and creation was gone. And you're probably wondering why. Well, the good news, if any, is that we are well equipped to answer this question. Powered by a team of detectives and 20+ years of virtual world and online gaming experience, and myself, aka a nerd, I am NS, or nerdSlayer, the detective featured in the Death of a Game series, a series where we pick dead or dying games or companies and attempt to diagnose the large contributing factors for such, utilizing a timeline of events and the various clues as the events unfold. And Hytale is dead, literally. And uniquely for the series is a game that never actually even launched. This makes it a perfect case swirled in mystery and questions, and something that gets a nerd like me excited. Why did Hytale die and find itself in the Death of a Game series? Well, stay tuned, and we have a timeline to unfurl. The story begins with the early beginnings of a Minecraft server spawned to the world in the spring of 2013. Now, before we get to the Hypixel server, we have to, of course, cover the game that the Hypixel server was based in, Minecraft. Now, I know almost the entire world knows about the game at this point, with it selling a whopping 300+ million copies, being playable on nearly all platforms, and there being countless videos talking about its impact and charm. And, well, it started the survival genre, a genre about gathering resources, building things, and killing peoples, in a video game, duh. But the relevant parts of the early history I want to cover are concerning the game's inception, and its creator, Notch, or Marcus Persson. Little known about Marcus, in my opinion, is his love for virtual worlds and the fact that he helped develop one back in the day in Worm Online. Worm was a true sandbox, in every sense of the word, allowing you, the player, to make the exact kind of character they wanted in a world they could customize and even terraform. Worm Online's worst aspects were simply due to it being a low-budget game and having poor visual clarity and graphics, but it was nothing short of innovative and impressive systems-wise, and from a region in Sweden that had little developmental experience with such complex MMORPGs, so it was even more impressive. Notch would depart the company and project and eventually create Minecraft, and we already mentioned what Minecraft's about, to show off a desire and interest that he had in, well, proc-gened worlds. Minecraft would go on to, really, without exaggeration, change the entire gaming industry, including creating an entire genre in the survival genre, which is essentially a spin-off from the virtual world industry, or genre, where players can literally craft and manipulate their environment in a way most virtual worlds, specifically the massive ones, can't and haven't been able to offer. Minecraft was some of Worm's systems simplified and brought forth to a whole new generation of gamers of all kinds. Around the time that Notch would depart, as he seemed to do whenever he would get bored enough with an idea, there would be some pretty significant EULA changes that would target premium servers and servers with rampant pay-to-win aspects. These servers were making millions of dollars and leveraging the powerful and massive audience that was in Minecraft. One of these such servers was actually Hypixel, the most popular Minecraft server, which got so popular it was breaking Guinness World Records. Hypixel wasn't just a server, it was a network, it was a community. It was a collection of servers, minigames, PvP battlegrounds, and more. Created by Minecraft enthusiasts Simon Hypixel LaFlame and Rezis or Felipe Touche, two Minecraft modders who had created adventure seeds and minigames previously. The server would then take off in a rush, climbing to an impressive 43 minigames and a whopping 64,000 concurrent players a few years later. Despite Hypixel's massive success, Mojang's new EULA changes worried Hypixel Incorporated, the company behind the server, who would as early as 2013 start to work on a backup plan with an unannounced new game, one that would help the modder team reach full game developer status, a status almost any aspiring modder ultimately wants to reach. This would ramp up quickly, and by 2015, Hypixel would announce on their forums the beginning of the development for their upcoming game that would be named Hytale. The team in just 2 years had grown double in size and had the budget increased from just $750,000 to $3.6 million, with some potential business partners already on the table too. The idea was simple. Hytale would use their own funds to self-fund enough of a prototype or idea until acquisition, or a publisher would come in and fill the rest of the blanks with more proper funding. At least we know that because Simon would later state that a few investors were in talks with them during this time, and including some serious ones, but none more impactful ultimately than Riot Games, who would ultimately become the game's publisher. That's because probably Riot Games reportedly had been supportive both financially and advice-wise from the beginning. This stemmed from Andrew Donahue, a founder of Hypixel, contacting a friend in InfoSec at Rito to view their demo for Hytale while he was traveling California. The new Hytale team was at around 20 developers, which consisted of half of the team from the Hypixel Minecraft server. In order to scale the idea and company fast enough, however, more developers and thus money was going to be needed. That's unless Hytale was willing to do like Minecraft did initially and just launch into alpha, then beta, and then kind of slowly take your time before adding the rest of the game's features, then have a full launch, and that's a totally viable option, really, right? But it would take more time, sure, but expectations would be more tame and people would likely forgive them, as they were a modding team making a real game for the first time. Doing it the fast way would require them to have more money and resources to work with, but also put a lot more expectations on the game because of that. The goal that Hypixel had from making a good game would then be elevated to having to make a great one. But as Simon would say, the success of Hypixel's Minecraft server would give them the support that they would need over time, and their ability to generate interest also guided their hand, like a guiding wave leading to a bigger storm. Quick detour. Two of the early developers that were tasked with working on the Hytale project would actually break off and form their own studio and game. Vintage Story is a more mature and advanced approach to Minecraft that has been quite positively received for a number of years, but since it's not on Steam due to them not wanting to split with Steam, it's not super well known. We don't know why developers Tyron and Irina Madliner would depart Hytale and form their own game, though I've heard that there were some creative differences. And maybe that's not totally worth looking into that much, but considering as many know that Hytale never launched and Vintage Story did, they would even later on offer jobs to ex-Hytale developers, there's something seriously interesting there to consider at the very least. Also worth considering, according to former Hytale programmer and creator of bdcraft.net, Sfax, early development of Hytale consisted of a sprint towards an engine that was written in C# and was light, fast, and very extensible. This would be the same early engine that Vintage Story was reportedly built on or from, which likely means that contracts were in place to really prevent this sort of thing from happening, because I doubt that Hypixel really wanted that to happen. But anyway, maybe it's just the nature of the unprofessional, modding team kind of stuff. Hytale would then be revealed to the world properly, and in a huge way, December 10th, 2018. Backed by Riot reportedly, Hytale was a brand new game from what was being described as from giants from the Minecraft community. And that was pretty accurate. Hytale was a talented team of modders who wanted to go pro, as Noxie would put, and a developer behind the scenes. Noxie was leading the charge now, actually, a former admin and operations manager for Hypixel Network. Noxie was placed as the CEO for Hypixel Studios, the studio behind the game Hytale. But Noxie didn't just serve as a CEO, Noxie reportedly had a major hand in game design and direction. You might be wondering, where was Simon? And that's a good question. Well, Simon was leading the charge behind the big early moves, at least from the tech perspective and design perspectives, reportedly, which was more of their focus anyway, but Simon always seemed to prefer just being behind the curtain, despite being a very talented creator. Hytale, in an interview published on the 11th of February 2019, would detail more about what the direction of the game was set to be, besides being community-focused and allowing for great customization. For starters, Hypixel might be associated with Minecraft, but Hytale was trying to be something more. This association would also likely help in Hytale's hype and popularity, because people like me actually thought that they were associated, but could actually prove later on to be quite toxic. Hytale was supposed to be like Minecraft, but far more. And not just the additions that the Hypixel servers would add, like the successful and popular minigames, but also the fact that Hypixel was going to design the game from the same modding toolset that players would be able to utilize in the future, which would allow players to utilize these mod tools to upload to the game directly, creating custom content and a pipeline that actually worked. It was a modder's paradise, without the corporatization that Mojang seemingly moved towards over time, which kind of triggered this entire thing. So really, in a big sense, a big part of the modding community in Minecraft was in support of Hytale, not just fans of the Hypixel servers. At this time, we're told that Hytale, at least sort of, consisted of some major aspects of importance. The community modding, as we just covered, but also the fact that the game wouldn't just be a lobby with minigames or Minecraft pasted over again, but offer a totally new and expansive adventure mode as well. This made Hytale sound like a new platform, and more than just a game. Closer to something like Roblox, a greatly moddable game, than Minecraft in some ways. Something that would be sort of confirmed by programmer Sfax, who stated that early Hytale had the ability to real-time block paint, place minigames on a single block like an arcade cabinet, and the ability to stream content like a proper cinema. But also, aware of this with its adventure mode announcement, which seemed closer to the standard proc-gen experience in a Minecraft server, but over time would morph to something more like Minecraft's story mode, without much guardrails around it, leading to the damaging of other aspects of the project, and likely ultimately leading to the game not launching. After being unveiled to the world, Hytale would eclipse an impressive 54 million views with its trailer on YouTube, a trailer that would even excite an old grumper gamer like myself, who feels like they've seen it all, with a preview February 2020, and it would be revealed that Hytale would feature tons of prefab content, and thus variety, on top of its proc-gen world, creating even more memorable experiences each time you would load up the game. Hytale would feature a quest system, not unlike a virtual world, and allow players to customize themselves with rewards and feel like an epic hero in their world. The combat was now much improved and even slicker and smoother than the surprisingly good combat in Minecraft. Now, if you're wondering what was the unique hook of Hytale besides, well, Minecraft, and besides it just being better at the things that I mentioned, according to Industry Vet, and a big developer behind World of Warcraft's success, Rob Pardo would state that being different simply for the sake of it wasn't necessarily better, and that really resonated with the Hytale team, and that you need to be adding value to the equation, which I actually agree with wholeheartedly. But that seemed to help impact what Hytale was set to be, which really was the combination of like Roblox, Minecraft, and even a virtual world or MMORPG sort of thrown in the middle of it. It was an insane idea. I mean, in a good way, or kind of, artistically, simply due to the sheer amount of possibilities and emergent gameplay and custom content that would be possible. I mean, theoretically, different servers could function like entirely different MMORPGs. And even better, with the community's help and an open stance on modding, the game could reach even greater heights than MMORPGs could with their help, much like Hypixel did in Minecraft. But sometimes modders like myself have these ideas, they're almost too good to be true. That's why we mod these things, because they are passion projects and not actually something we have to worry about an ROI or a return on the investment. We also don't have to worry about outside investors and deadlines. But when you switch from going modder to professional game dev or AMI to pro, you suddenly have to make this big switch too, and think about how you spend your time properly. Things like feature creep and wasted time become debilitating over time and company affecting. Not being a total surprise to many, myself included, would be the news that Riot Games would fully acquire Hypixel Studios April 2020. The reason this doesn't surprise me is because Hypixel was making Hytale into something that would be almost impossible to ignore, and Riot wanted to be a part of that in a major way, while also having the control and protection and, well, liability they felt they needed as a major company. They would reportedly acquire Hypixel Studios and Hytale for $100+ million and would immediately hire 20 more developers, doubling the team yet again, with even more promises of more hirings on the way. To coincide with this and the fact that Hytale was previously being designed by a fully remote team would be the erection of a new office in Northern Ireland to host the executive and financial staff at Hytale. But this acquisition was anything but smooth from the very beginning, whether due to disagreement or not wanting to be involved in the same capacity. Due to having these new overseers, Simon would actually leave the project during this time and put Noxie in charge, citing being overwhelmed by the new situation. And maybe that was actually true. I think it also has something to do with the fact that Hypixel as a server network had lost like 80% of its population following the EULA changes, meaning that Simon needed to fix his breadwinner. And worse, more industry vets would be hired during this time, which sounds like a good thing, but in an attempt to beef up the amateur team in place previously, and this would then create some kind of major issues. First, modders and community amateurs are insanely talented, but that doesn't make them the best developers because now they have like professional responsibilities. At the same time, simply because some old farts worked on games that aren't even like related and we haven't heard of, doesn't make them more talented or more qualified than these modders are. What happened at Hypixel following the Riot injection of funds and acquisition was a culture clash, and a clash between leadership. This has been confirmed by the original developers on the project, where they stated that the early leadership at Hypixel was problematic, especially following the new hirings. In a sense, these new hirings would treat the old team like amateurs, and had little respect for their ideas or concepts. Some of these concerns that the more veteran leadership would have were the fact that Hytale seemed to be more like a modding platform than a full-fledged game, and that the game was built on C#, which according to how the engine was constructed wouldn't allow for larger, dare I say more massive gameplay. A valid concern, perhaps. Following a delay announced in the summer of 2021, Hypixel would state that they had the desire to shift this engine to a new one, built on C++ instead. Problem being, the game was already in development for at least 4 years. Engine change this late was risky, and certainly only worth it if absolutely needed. It would also require a full rewrite of the server and client-side code. I also have a strong inkling that the fact that the game originally lacked the cross-platform capability or framework also contributed to them wanting to shift towards it. But beside that point, the game now had seemingly been pushed indefinitely with a tentative date placed in 2023, which was 2 years later. One of these new leaders was John Hendricks, a developer that I'm not really familiar with, but one who was promoted to a full-on game director by 2022. John would prove to be the most controversial public figure on Hytale, especially post the game's shuttering. Reportedly, John wasn't very popular amongst other developers, especially the original core crew, which would lead to departures such as Polina, who was a core artist on the original game. This new direction for the game seemed to heavily focus on the game's adventure mode, or story mode, which would feature the world Orbis and a number of zones within it, producing different biomes and challenges that you would have to overcome. Hytale is described as having 3 pillars at this time. The first pillar, the classic Minecraft-like experience, gives you the ability to customize the server far greater than the parent game could ever. The second was the classic Hypixel experience, a host of servers and worlds and full of minigames and social activities. And the final was the full-fledged story mode. For me, this was like basically making Minecraft 2 and then some, because that's the expectation people would have of such a game. This new direction was supposed to be more focused and more viable as a business idea, but I didn't see it. What I saw was a pit that they would now only have to continue to contribute to grow out of. Because who can just make Minecraft 2 casually? No one, not even Notch, could. And he built the first one in a cave with screws and like a rubber ducky. but there were so many questions. Without Notch, who was leading the charge regarding virtual world concepts and ideas? Something a modder doesn't even have to understand most of the time, to be clear, and something people probably don't really attribute, Notch having as a skill. The Hytale team had talent, but that talent seemed to be focused more on turning other people's talent into more talented things. The early idea of Hytale might not have been as sexy to investors or old school developers, but it was far more realistic, coming from a team who never made a real game before. Expanding its scope and ambition might seem like a natural move, but the next thing you know, you're making a sequel to one of the biggest games ever, and without the creator or any of the developers who know much about virtual worlds, which is key. Good luck. Because that's another thing Rito doesn't seem to understand yet, with their other ventures into the virtual space either. Just because a developer has a pedigree doesn't make them a good world builder, and doesn't mean that they are at all relevant in a modern tech or concept. Like Dr. Dre says, you have to constantly immerse yourself in this sort of thing to keep sharp, and I didn't see anyone, not a single member of the Hytale team, that made me feel that way with virtual worlds. Someone with an encyclopedic knowledge of virtual worlds, a natural systems builder, or someone with ability to command respect publicly or privately. We know they were all Minecraft fans, but that wasn't the only skill set that you were going to need to make a game of this caliber. What started as a community response to perceived unfair capitalism or regulations had become a game that had to be the next biggest thing, and nobody on the team seemingly knew how to get there. The scale creep would only continue to grow, as would the size of the team required to deliver upon this idea, now reaching a whopping 110 developers in size. That's basically the size of an MMORPG studio. This might seem like a natural scaling though, right? Because you need tons of devs to work on something that's close to an MMO. But that wasn't really what Hytale was. It just became more of that over time, until it basically took form of something not really yet perfected, but attempted a few times with games like Funcom's Dune Awakening or Atlas, which is a survival game MMO, or a survival game that's consciously built like a virtual world but not quite massive. Now these aren't the only attempts. Popular servers like Minecraft's Skyblock and Windcraft are already very much this, but on the survival game side of things, being playable worlds within Minecraft, Skyblock plays like a hardcore Minecraft with MMO features where players spawn in the sky on a small plot and must explore and survive. And Windcraft literally is designed like an MMORPG, but being more like an ORPG due to the lower player count. Some of the private servers in Minecraft could actually host up to hundreds of players and even up to 1,000 simultaneously, which would qualify them as an MMORPG, the massive variant, surely. Virtual World pioneer Raph Koster, when I spoke to him about Minecraft, not only agreed about this, with it being a virtual world even if it's a smaller one, and noted that it was also created by a virtual world developer. We would also even argue that the biggest servers were pretty much their own MMORPGs. Hytale was trying to compete with this crowd and be like just that, which was not going to be easy, especially with how much money these servers made in Minecraft without nearly as much effort or risk. Hypixel was aware of this after all, because they would introduce Skyblock after the fact, which would become their most popular server. Ironically, the creator of that server originally didn't want people like Hypixel to make tons of dough off of their custom games idea, probably because they couldn't, but I understand that, but there was little legal recourse for that. Simon was leading the charge at Hypixel Incorporated and servers, having returned to it after the acquisition to right the adrift ship. What ultimately set Hypixel aside wasn't their uniqueness. It was their ability to take other ideas and better implement them in their game and servers, including with a much better community approach and management system. Making a new game was a major leap for them, and one that was yet to pay off yet. But their Minecraft servers were still chugging and still on top. At this point, the community was exceedingly worried though. Updates had slowed to a snail pace, and at this point the game was 9 years into development, if you count when it was first conceived as an idea. People, rightfully, were expecting results, and at least a playable demo or something. But as Hytale would announce, they were still transitioning their creatives to the new engine, whatever that meant, and transitioning their tech developers too, I guess? Unless they all just knew C++, which was the new language they needed. John Hendricks would state that things were chugging along, and had been, but it's been years at that point, and Riot's offhand approach to things was not even what the community wanted at this point. I mean, how much longer was Riot going to fund a company that hasn't produced a game yet or even a playable demo, and one that's costing millions and millions of dollars? I know Riot will get seen as a bad guy in all of this and still get blamed in the comments even after I wrote all of this, but as I will talk about shortly, blame has to be placed primarily on Hypixel. I mean, even the developers of the game said that themselves. Noxie was the one that hired these veteran developers who supposedly mutinied the project, making him a major part of the blame, especially since he stayed by the project and continued supporting it thereon. If anything, Riot's offhand approach to Hytale likely put it in the position that it got to, and that's what happens when you trust veteran leadership sometimes. They are only vets because they are still standing, not because they were the best suited for that particular job, or even the most current on things. John Hendricks seemed to be able to convince Riot and crew that things were still moving though, but not the community, by the end of 2024. And that was an important part of the puzzle. The biggest strength of Hytale, after all, was its pre-existing and massive community. Hypixel might not lose them outright because they still had their own community server content in the Minecraft world, but they would certainly turn people off of their supposedly upcoming new project. And then it happened, shocking myself and many others. Since we didn't have the gift of hindsight at that time, or a well-researched video, thank you, Hytale would be cancelled, and their studio, Hypixel Studios, shut down alongside it. Noxie would state in a blog post detailing the sunsetting that today I share some incredibly tough news with the Hypixel Studios team. We're ending development on Hytale and beginning the process of winding down Hypixel Studios over the next few months. This is not the outcome any of us at Hypixel or Riot wanted, but after years of pushing forward, adapting, and exploring every possible path, it became clear we couldn't bring Hytale to life in a way that truly delivered on its promise. Noxie would further continue, talking about how game development was hard, and how even after the major reboot of the game on a new engine, it still became clear that it needed more work. Noxie and team would claim that they still believed in the game though, but thought that reducing the scope, adjusting timelines, or finding new angles to move forward would require them to compromise the idea and product that they wanted to deliver on, and thus they didn't do it. Okay, where to start? I might be one of your favorite detectives, but I hope I'm everybody's favorite PR spokesperson whisperer, right? Seeing value where there is little, and getting through the shit. Noxie's right, game development is hard. I know, I've tried, over and over again. But so are many other jobs, including project-based ones. And I know I'm gonna sound like an asshole, but fuck it. The thought of me working in construction again, which I did for nearly 8 years as a cost estimator and project manager, making excuses about how things were so hard, so I failed a project is just absurd. Nobody would care and nobody would take me seriously in my field. Now sure, this is art in the case of Hytale, and more feelings and such are involved, but we have to start normalizing just saying when developers don't do a good job, and usually the ones that are in leadership positions that can affect change. Hytale had a path forward. Come on, they just took a bad path. Whether that be the numerous decisions that led to feature creep and a lengthy development time, or the change in direction, or more. But Hytale's path was rocky at best, unless it could outdo Minecraft enough. While games like Vintage Story had more of an appeal towards survival, and games like Satisfactory serviced the more automation-focused gamers. And of course, like the dozen 2D spin-off variants are all about exploration, spelunking, and adventure. Hytale wanted to be unique, and host their minigames in responsive combat and PvP focus that their servers were kind of known for. And I think they figured out after the fact that that would require them to basically make a full virtual world, and not just a platform. How they arrived at this conclusion wasn't pretty either. Following the news of the shutdown would be a stream of prior developers at Hytale speaking on the situation too. Former IT devs, artists, designers, and programmers such as Slikey, Ninja Charlie, Sfax, and dev/null would state that issues might be blamed on Riot from the outside, but in their opinion, the issues were more so due to the internal leadership issues at Hytale. Many, like dev/null, would even compliment Riot's involvement, claiming that they were actually a delight to work with. And many of the developers, in a never really seen before, in my opinion since, would even start warring on Twitter over some of these ideas. Specifically though, the infamous game director John Hendricks, who would respond to Noxie's blog post with a rebuttal, stating that scope creep or development hell wasn't the game's problem, and John would instead state that they just didn't have enough time. But nobody was going to be sympathetic to a game that had development longer than 10 years, sorry. As more musings would be revealed, we would find out that according to many of these sources, Hytale didn't just engine reboot their game, they fully had a playable beta level game in 2021, which means they scrapped it. But due to production and design unrealistic expectations and desires according to Slikey, this would be torpedoed instead to ultimately launch nothing at all. The only person who tried to rebuke any of this argument in public so far is John Hendricks, who seemingly was a big leading force on the project. John would state that the idea of launching in 2021 with what they had originally, to counter what Slikey said, wouldn't have worked, because it would have been a bait and switch. Hendricks would further state that you can't sell people on a big game and then sell them a modding project. And to be honest, he might be wrong about some other things, and not very much a good leader, but this isn't entirely wrong. However, it's a AAA expectation being placed on a game, an idea that didn't necessarily need one. Riot funding or immense talent or not, these were still amateurs, and launching a feature-complete virtual world is already difficult as hell even for pros. And sure, Hendrix might have made a point if the game even launched ultimately, but it didn't. So technically, whether he or others thought the game was just a modding project sold as a game or not, at least that version of the game had a chance of launching. Instead, what was delivered was nothing. Hytale had its cogs spun for over a decade, and nothing was produced to the public that was ultimately playable. Do I think that the original idea of Hytale could have, worked and grown to eventually been something more? Perhaps, right? Especially with the humble approach. But I struggle to see what they would have done with that idea after getting all that big funding and investment from a big company expecting far more. The game was supposed to be a major evolution of Minecraft, not just like a spin-off, and that evolution wasn't really apparent for many, public or private. For me, Hytale was kind of looking more like Minecraft 1.5, if anything, at least what we could see of it. Maybe it could have grown to more, but I think that still would have had an audience, but just nothing close to the millions of people that were attracted by Hytale's big announcement trailer, which showed a lot more than a Minecraft 1.5 and even arguably a 2.0. It looked to be like a real sequel of sorts. While feature creep and development hell certainly plagued Hytale, I think its lack of a unique identity is also what led to those issues compacting. Simon would respond to the drama stating that when he was working on Hytale, it was maybe 2 years away from PC as a first focused release. That was 5 years ago, and Simon was even willing to purchase the IP back for $25 million if Riot would let him. Simon was not really involved in the past few years and admitted that he had no idea what transpired following his departure, and that even still being involved in the future still worried him. Now, I know many of you might blame Simon for departing, since he was key to the project's success in many ways. But Simon admitted, remember, that he was overwhelmed with high expectations. Now, whether that's a cop-out and you believe him or not is, it's ultimately up to you. But Riot was Simon's first choice, and even being offered way more money by other big-name companies didn't dissuade him from that, because Simon had faith in Riot's ability, as they were able to take a Dota spin-off, which was a mod in itself, and turn it into another successful Titan online multiplayer game, with League of Legends, striking some big parallels. And Riot was a big virtual world fan, as I know from sources at Riot and for the fact that they've been trying to make one for like 15 years. Simon reported to have been spending around $400,000 a month on the game, and that would have been sustainable had the Hypixel servers not taken a major dip, which forced him to start to push for investment. From all we've seen, Simon is more like Notch in the sense of being talented, but not exactly like publicly trained. Those kinds of people are exceedingly honest, cough cough, and don't really want to manage things. But Simon does have to take some blame regarding who he put in charge of the project, which ultimately failed. You might have believed in Riot to do things right, but Riot was trusting in your leadership, and Riot still hadn't made a virtual world yet, and the people you put in charge to run things were causing problems. Sure, maybe they wanted Riot to be more hands-on, but that's not what happened. They were hands-off, which is pretty surprising for a big successful tech company. But the music's playing. Yay, I can go outside now. No, seriously, thanks. Detectives, you've gathered enough clues. Not just because that's what we do as detectives, but because, well, the timeline's over, chaps. So we don't really have a choice but to get to the deducing on this case. In case you weren't paying attention along the way and missed any of the clues, what were the largest contributing factors to the death of a game, Hytale? No core virtual world experience or understanding. Scope creep. Poor executive management. Difficulty cornering a market. Confusing direction that changed majorly. Minecraft adjacent. The truth is, more survival games, whether Minecraft likes or not, or something sprung from that, is good for the market. But the market already has this, with a growing level of variety and depth in these games too, whether 2D or 3D focus, survival focus, or building focus. Not saying the launch of something as ambitious as Hytale sucks for the survival game market, but it's not crippling at all. The sad part of this all is obviously, of course, to people who lost their job. We give them our condolences. But also to the fact that the failure of Hytale actually hurts the virtual world industry. I know, this sounds like a stretch, and it's already a struggling market, but hear me out. If Hytale succeeded, it would have opened up an entirely new market to everybody. Without virtual worlds, survival games don't exist, but they aren't exactly the same audiences that overlap, as survival games appeal to a whole new audience in many ways, whether small children or old busy parents. This would have opened up those types of players to other styles of virtual worlds or just virtual worlds in general, and of course even something like Hytale. So in a sense, we lose as MMO or virtual world gamers because Hytale could have really bridged an all new gap, or at least been another major bridge in that process. But luckily, for those of us who enjoy them, we still have plenty of surviving or new survival games to play and enjoy. At least in the meantime, while we wait for the next generation of MMOs or even survival games, since we don't have a choice. But thanks for watching, and let me know in the comments below if you believe that Hytale could have succeeded with its first version, and if you would like to see more survival games inspired by massive virtual worlds.